After perusing on YouTube, I've been wondering, what if Gojo and Sukuna had a rematch? What if Gege just dropped the narrative implications and decided to be a bunch of Twitter fingers and rewrite the story? I totally jacked this topic from another channel that I'll link in the description. Check out their video, please, because they are much better at this than I am. And as far as the timeline of this, let's just say this rematch takes place after all of Jujutsu High loses, so they're all dead in a perfect world. And Sukuna is 100% healed up, zero brain damage, no binding vow, incomplete domain. And Gojo's been miraculously revived like 90% of Twitter wanted and is completely ready for round two. The King of Curses is coming into this fight with 2 more arms, another mouth, and a taller stature. While there's no way to scale exactly how much this will help him, as it's left a little open-ended and he slightly loses in hand-to-handed Yuji, it'd be pure bias to write it off entirely like I see most people do when trying to scale his true form in a rematch format. And at this point, Sukuna has lost 10 shadows as shown in chapter 266 when he claims the only way he could sink into the shadows that are coming from the ground is from Megumi, as his own 10 shadows is no longer working, or I think he uses the term online. This means Sukuna can now use domain amplification, which is implied by Gojo to make Sukuna stronger, as he states his output's ramping up, as if he's questioning how he could be getting stronger by turning off his curse technique. He can now also use his own curse technique within domains, which will be a massive advantage now that Gojo is swapping the external and internal conditions, making the domain weak on the inside. Gojo even points out this flaw and wonders why Sukuna is not abusing it, but he said this while not knowing that Sukuna was attempting to adapt to Unlimited Void. And so, for those who do not know, when Sukuna was using 10 Shadows to adapt, he cannot use his own curse technique or domain amplification because it would interrupt the process of adaptation. This is brought up again when Sukuna uses domain amp to try and hit Gojo, and the wheel on his back turns black, showing interrupted adaptation. However, as I said earlier, this is no longer a factor. Undeniably, Sukuna's biggest tool in his arsenal is the World Slash, which he can only fire after making the Malevolent Shrine hand sign and pointing in the direction he wants to fire while chanting. However, this will be really hard to pull off against Gojo, who knows about the technique since it literally split him in half, and Gojo's obviously extremely fast. It'd be super easy for him to just grab Sukuna's hands and rip them apart, or shoot a red directly at Sukuna's face. Honestly, there's a lot of ways it can be countered. I saw people bringing up the fact that Sukuna's slashes are faster than Gojo from this panel specifically. Definitely debatable. Like, I don't know if I'd say that. However, I don't want to get into that can of worms, and honestly, I don't care too much about it because it doesn't matter for this fight because Gojo can aim dodge from the significant warning that is charging up World Slash. Changes to Gojo's kit are pretty minimal, besides the fact that in his fight with Sukuna, he learns he can heal the burnout 5 times. That's the brain burnout for domain expansion. And using Unlimited Hollow, the version in which he shoots a blue at a red, or vice versa, to create a hollow purple explosion, he figures out it doesn't damage himself nearly as much as the enemy, which it seems he was a bit iffy on because he said it to Sukuna as if it was a realization. So theoretically, in a perfect world, Gojo would just be able to fire off unlimited hollows like crazy, just fucking up Sukuna, blowing him up over and over. The only problem that I had with this point from that other video is you should be fair to both parties. This is a topic a lot of people fail to bring up. Sukuna also knows about Unlimited Hollow, just as Gojo knows about World Slash. Sukuna saw Gojo's energy buildup and could determine whether he was using our blue or red as shown in this panel here. And there's no adaptation to backfire. He's not going to be sending anyone else to try to stop it. It's just going to be Sukuna himself trying to stop it. However, Sukuna did mention in his fight against Yuta, who was in Gojo's body, that Satoru had to use it that way because Sukuna could too easily stop a normal purple. But still, Unlimited Hollow requires a chant and the obvious action of firing a red at a blue. Thinking Sukuna will just sit around and let this happen, or that he has zero way of countering it, sounds extremely biased to me. Sukuna could just charge a World Slash and kill Gojo if you think it'll land. I personally don't. Or could destroy the red or blue with said World Slash or a barrage of different slashes, which he could obviously not do before because he was using the 10 Shadows Maharaga to try to stop the purple, so he could not fire a slash even if he wanted to. This World Slash or Barrage of Slashes are most likely to break Gojo's domain due to the swapped conditions. And if Gojo tries to get up close and personal to activate this unlimited hollow, there's nothing stopping Sukuna from covering his mouth to prevent the chance, like he did against Megumi, who was trying to summon Maharaga. Now that Sukuna has domain amplification and 4 arms, it's not going to be a problem. Gojo would also come into this fight knowing how to withstand Sukuna's domain instead of slowly having to figure it out, which is 100% a buff for Gojo. And the strategy is, like I said a few seconds earlier, just swapping the external internal conditions. Gojo using this strategy results in a hand-to-hand showdown almost, where Gojo has to do a certain amount of damage or else Shrine will hit. I do believe Shrine hitting is a win con for Sukuna, since he does not have to change barrier conditions, so he can stoke the flames of Furnace. And he has World Slash. His AP is significantly higher and will no doubt result in Gojo's death while he's in technique burnout. Gojo would most likely have an extremely hard time dodging a World Slash while in this state of burnout. I say this because when he lost the first clash, Sukuna keeps up with him fairly easily. Like, he does not get hit whatsoever. Almost as if Gege wants to show us that in this state, he slows down a little bit and Sukuna can try kind of keep up. All this happens before he can reset because we've seen that it takes time to do said reset. For example, Gojo had to use a simple domain to buy time in the first clash instead of healing the burnout. To defend against another barrage of slashes, he then secondly used Falling Blossom in motion, in which we can see Sukuna is visibly shocked in this panel here, which will now no longer be the case because Sukuna knows that's Gojo's only option when Sukuna wins a domain clash. We do know that the second to last clash, the domains were practically breaking at the exact same time. And the only time Gojo won a clash, he had to land another one-off punch to delay Sukuna's healing of the burnout, so he had to heal his body. Sukuna is now physically stronger, there's no arguing that whatsoever. So if you have this extremely even clash ending at the exact same time, and then you make the other character stronger, what's going to happen? Well, I'm going to show you. I believe this fight would start with a domain clash as both fighters fought each other earlier and were able to feel each other out. And then this 3-minute showdown would once again begin as Gojo has no other domain tactic. He would either try to conjure an unlimited hollow or beat Sukuna in hand-to-hand combat. With Sukuna now being inarguably physically stronger, any normal person would know the hand-to-hand route is not going to go anywhere, so he will go with the purple. So he's going to start using these applications of Limitless like red and blue and Unlimited Hollow. Sukuna knows of all of these, especially Hollow. He will be watching for that. And according to this panel I showed earlier, Sukuna can see which ability Gojo is about to fire. And knowing this, Sukuna could either fire a World Slash if Gojo's charging it from a distance, or stop Gojo from chanting as he did to Megumi, like I said earlier, if it's a close quarter situation. Assuming this would happen and Gojo cannot fire the purple or win in hand-to-hand, his barrier would crumble and Gojo would immediately resort to those anti-domain techniques, Falling Blossom or Simple Domain. Most likely Falling Blossom because that one worked a lot better. Sukuna now knows that this is Gojo's only next move that he would do, and he would begin to lay into him with slashes from the domain and punches with his forearms, now that Gojo is slower like we saw earlier with the first clash that he lost. Repeating this cycle, Gojo would keep getting more and more brain damage, and then he would burn out his RCT because we know the brain damage hurts RCT, and then Sukuna would have enough flames for the Furnace and obliterate Gojo. We know Furnace has a really high AP because Purple left behind plenty of rubble from buildings, and Furnace completely obliterated everything in Sukuna's domain. Combined with the slashes, it's a reach to say Gojo lives, especially with 0 RCT. And in the manga, in this panel, you can see here, it clearly states that the domain kills everything living within it. You could argue that it didn't kill Yuji, but he was protected by Choso, and it did kill Choso. So, yeah. Giving Gojo the benefit of the doubt, let's say throughout these 5 brain resets he has to try to hit Sukuna, he does. Which does have a chance of breaking his own barrier, as seen with Yuta. Yuta's was from a misfire, from aiming the wrong direction. But Unlimited Hollow is an AoE, so you could argue it would break the domain, you could argue it doesn't. Doesn't really matter. My next point still stands. Sukuna would no doubt survive, as he would have taken minimal damage at this point from winning most of the domain clashes. and he hasn't had to reset his brain whatsoever, so his RCT is at full output. However, he would be in a worse position for the next clash due to the RCT lag of healing his body. But I'd say that only if he didn't have some kind of anti-domain tech like Gojo did. But Chewy, how does Sukuna not sustain massive damage breaking Hollow Wicker Basket now that he only has 2 arms? Because it does require 2 arms to keep Hollow Wicker Basket. Didn't you say the only reason he didn't lose in hand to hand is because he has 4 arms? Yeah, I did say that. But now we know that Gojo's barrier is weak from the inside. So as simple as Sukuna popping Hollow Wicker Basket and then firing barrages of slashes at Gojo's inside domain, which I said earlier, Gojo says as if Sukuna knows it's weak from the inside. But Chewie, in all of your infinite wisdom, you forgot that Gojo could just stop him from shooting slashes. After all, doesn't it require hand signs to do so? No, it actually does. As you can see in this panel, in his fight with Kusakabe, he fires a slash with no motion whatsoever. Okay, Chewie, these are all great points. But couldn't Gojo just swap domain conditions and make it strong to internal attacks? I'd say shut up, first of all. Second of all, that is a possibility. However, Gojo doesn't know for certain if he will win that clash. I imagine Gojo wouldn't want to spend any time swapping conditions, because the more time he takes to swap the conditions, the more even it gets. Because it would give Sukuna more time to heal. You could argue swapping conditions does not take much time for these top tier characters, which it doesn't, I would agree. But if you look at the one clash Gojo won at the very end of the clashes, the difference was less than 100th of a single second. This leads me to believe that Gojo wouldn't even consider time to swap conditions and would immediately pop domain in the desperate situation that he's in. And finally, the cherry on top for my entire argument is Gojo saying it would be a close fight in his death, even if Sukuna didn't have 10 shadows. This is without Gojo knowing about Furnace, about Kamutoke, which we are not mentioning in this because he wouldn't have it. He doesn't know about Sukuna's true form with his 4 arms, and he has no idea about Hollow Wicker Basket. Anyway, those are my thoughts. Thank you for watching my poorly made video. If you could like and sub, that'd be awesome. Let me know about any oversights I had. I'm sure there are plenty. This is my first kind of video like this. I'd love to talk about it in the comments. Peace.